Before 1939, the world was still healing from the First World War. Empires had fallen, economies were shattered, and millions were lost. People promised, never again. But barely 20 years later, humanity would descend once more into darkness. World War II wasn't just another war, it was the most destructive conflict in human history, one that reshaped borders, ideologies, and the destiny of entire nations. Over 70 million lives were lost. Yet, from this unimaginable destruction, a new world emerged. The modern world we live in today. On September 1st, 1939, German tanks rolled across the Polish border. Blitzkrieg Lightning War, a revolutionary strategy combining air power, fast-moving tanks, and radio coordination. Poland fell in weeks. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. But their armies were unprepared for what was coming. By the summer of 1940, Hitler's forces had swept through Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. Europe was falling under the shadow of the swastika. Only one nation still stood defiant across the Channel, Great Britain. Hitler turned his eyes toward the skies. If he could destroy the Royal Air Force, he could invade the island next. So began the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely by air forces. German bombers filled the skies, targeting airfields, cities, and civilians. London burned for 57 consecutive nights. But Britain's pilots, young men barely in their 20s, held the line. Radar technology gave them an edge, and the courage of the few turned the tide. For the first time in the war, Hitler was defeated. His invasion of Britain was postponed, then abandoned. But Hitler's ambition knew no limits. In June 1941, he broke his pact with Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. The largest land invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers crossed the border. At first, success came quickly. Cities like Kiev and Smolensk fell. But as winter arrived, the German army found itself trapped in a nightmare. The cold froze engines, weapons, and men. The Soviets refused to surrender. At Stalingrad, the fighting turned into hell on earth. Street by street, building by building, both sides lost hundreds of thousands. When the Germans finally surrendered in February 1943, Hitler's dream of conquering the East was shattered. The tide of war began to turn. While Europe burned across the Pacific, tensions were rising. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In just 2 hours, the American Pacific Fleet lay in ruins. But Japan had awakened a giant. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on America. Now the conflict was truly global. From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the world was at war. By 1943, the Allies began to push back. In North Africa, British and American forces defeated Rommel's Afrika Korps. Then came Sicily and Italy, the first cracks in Hitler's empire. At sea, Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park deciphered the German Enigma code, giving them vital intelligence. In the air, the U.S. and Britain began massive bombing campaigns, destroying Germany's industrial heartlands. But everyone knew true victory could only come with an invasion of Europe itself. June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Over 150,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel to storm the beaches of Normandy. The cost was enormous. Waves of men fell under machine gun fire. But through courage and sacrifice, the beachheads were secured. France began to rise again. 2 months later, Paris was liberated. Hitler's empire was collapsing from both east and west. The end was near, but the bloodiest days were still ahead. By early 1945, the Soviets were closing in from the east, while American and British troops advanced from the west. Germany was surrounded. In April, the Red Army reached Berlin. The city became a battlefield, street by street, bunker by bunker. Civilians hid in basements as artillery thundered above. And on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. 1 week later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In Europe, the war was finally over. But across the Pacific, it still raged on. Japan refused to surrender. The fighting in Iwo Jima and Okinawa had shown how fierce resistance could be. American planners feared millions more would die if they invaded Japan's home islands. Then came a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another fell on Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to ash. Over 200,000 civilians perished. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. World War II was over. But the dawn of the atomic age had begun. The world that emerged from the war was completely transformed. Europe lay in ruins, its empires broken. The United States and the Soviet Union stood as the new superpowers, locked in a tense rivalry that would shape the next 50 years, the Cold War. The United Nations was founded to prevent another global catastrophe. Germany was divided. Japan rebuilt into a democracy. Colonies across Asia and Africa began to seek independence. Technology advanced faster than ever. Radar, jet engines, nuclear power, computers, all born from wartime innovation. World War II was not just a war of armies, it was a war of ideas. Democracy versus tyranny, freedom versus oppression. It changed how nations viewed power, justice, and humanity itself. From the ashes of cities rose a new world order, built on fragile hope and hard-earned lessons. Today, when we look at modern Europe, the global economy, or even the Internet age, we still live in the world that World War II created. Greater than the war that destroyed the past, built the future. This was pages of history, where the past lives and the world remembers. Subscribe now and uncover the stories that shaped our future.